Yeah, what up, what up, what up? So, what's up? This is the book that I'm going to be going over today. They Came Before Columbus. It's a very controversial book. A lot of people either quote from it or a lot of people say that the information is inaccurate. What I like to do, as always, is I like to just share what I've learned from it. Of course, I got my tabs on there, and I like to just present whatever it is that I've read throughout, my time and my research. I don't really have an opinion on the matter. I do have some ideas and I do have some questions even after reading this book. But that doesn't mean that I believe one over the other. I love sources. I love accuracy. I like scientific data. When this book was first written, of course, the information that was shared was only, from that time period. So this book was copyrighted in 1976. So that, at that time, they barely had anything to go off of as far as scientific data. And what I mean by that is by DNA, the artifacts that they found, the radiocarbon, even though they say that, they can date things to a certain period, they pick and choose what date is that they're most comfortable with. And what I mean by that, if they say that this artifact goes back, about 3,000 years, that can be a rough estimate. That doesn't mean that it's actually 3,000 years. It could be anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 to 1,500. It doesn't matter. It's just a date that they are comfortable with at that time. And it can be so many different elements on how that information is actually given and shared throughout. So it's not always, uh, a pinpoint of saying like, this happened exactly at this time and this date and at this place and so on and so forth. So let me bring up this PowerPoint slide. It's not much on there. It's just a little bit, just getting it started and, just basically sharing what I've learned from reading this book. This is not me saying that this information that I read is accurate. I'm not saying that it's inaccurate. What I'm saying is that the person that wrote this book, Ivan von Cernema, he did his information. Now, this is what's very interesting about this, and I got to say this. I've had plenty of times people come to me and argue about, oh, I'm Afrocentric and this, that, and the third. And I'm just like, yo, do you even know where these people got this information from? First of all, they got most of their information from white Europeans. So it's not black people sitting up here saying anything. This is one thing that I hate, and I'm glad it's Black History Month. There was a time when black people could not read books at all. It was forbidden. They would be killed for it, hung, lynched, and everything else for reading information, right? Then they slowly started learning about stuff. Then they started being able to go to school and colleges and all this other stuff and gain this information. Godfrey Higgins, which I've said so many times, is one of my favorite authors and historians. Wrote books in 1833, Anaclipsis Volume 1 and 2, and he also wrote The Celtic Druids. He literally says in his books that these individuals were dark skinned black individuals. Now the word black will offend so many people, which I don't understand why. First of all, let's go over and find out what is black first. Black is anything from light brown to dark brown. Okay, that's what black is. So you have black Dominicans. I wrote an article on that. You have black Puerto Ricans. You have black Mexicans. You even have when you go to Japan, some of the indigenous people, the Ainu people, they have dark brown skin. So anybody that had, or light brown skin, depending on where they're at over there now, but no matter what, where you're at in this world, I don't care where you're at in this world. If you have light brown to dark brown, you are considered black in the Western civilization, in the Western world. That's just facts. I'm considered black. I'm not. I'm yeah, my hair. My father was African American. My mom is German, and then everything in between that. So my mom has like Turkish in her. She has French in her. I don't know where the Irish side comes from. It's just amazing about my heritage and my background. Excuse me. So what I want to point out is that there are people who will say, I'm not black, but have skin color like mine. I've been to Iraq, I've been to Afghanistan. I have pictures of me standing next to Iraqis and Afghanis. I can tell you right now, they have the same skin color as some of them. Some of them have the same type of hair that I have. I haven't seen anybody with long hair like mine, or it's very rare at least. But in America, I grew up in the South. I'm from Georgia. When I went to school, I was considered black. Now, when I was considered black towards the other, I guess you could say other black kids that were there, however you want to phrase that. No, I didn't have the same hair texture as them. And both my parents weren't completely black. Like I said, my mom is German, my father is African American. My mom is white, my father is black. When I went to school, I was considered black. When I was out on the streets, whenever they see me and they didn't like me, they called me the N-word. Matter of fact, I've been called the N-word so many times. It's just amazing that in 2026 that we get to the point. And another thing about the N-word, a lot of people say, well, black people say it in hip hop and this and that and third. That just tells me that they don't even know the history of the N-word. They just pick it. They know the racist term and they don't care about educating themselves. So they're ignorant to the fact that they don't understand what the N-word is. And that starts a whole controversy among a whole bunch of people. And it's sad because in 2026, I don't have my phone near me. People got phones and they can look this stuff up. And it's so funny that a lot of them are so lazy that they'll go straight to ChatGPT and Grok and all this other stuff and ask questions. You can manipulate ChatGPT and Grok as long as you're knowledgeable enough on how to manipulate, especially if you got sources. I've had asked ChatGPT and Grok so many questions that came straight out of books, not this book in particular, but just straight out of books, scientific journals, peer-reviewed articles. I'll copy it and paste it and put it in there. And I'll ask it, hey, is this accurate? And they'll be like, no, this ain't accurate. And I'd be like, well, this came from a peer-reviewed article. And I linked the peer-reviewed article. And they'd be like, well, I know that kind of in so many different ways. ChatGPT done it. Grok has done it. One thing that I know that Elon Musk does is he likes to play with emotions because he says, well, Grok is this and Grok is that, Grok is the best and he comes out with the best information and so on and so forth. No, it doesn't. It's just as bad as any of the AI because you implemented your narratives in there. A human being updated that information or gave the information to that computer. So it's going off based off what you did. So when Elon Musk says all this stuff, all he's trying to do is just trying to control the narrative. You have to cross-reference. That's why you cross-reference with different AI. And you have to ask it specific questions sometimes. Hey, give me a source. Okay. Matter of fact, one of the biggest things is the whole thing about the Joan of Arc thing. A lot of people I've said, hey, it doesn't specifically say she's white. Some people will bring up a picture and say is depicted as her. They don't know that the person that depicted her never seen her. He just went off a word of mouth. And she's actually written as dark or sunburnt. A lot of people don't know that black people get sunburnt. So that's not a good argument for that, right? Then they'll say, well, dark doesn't mean black. And I'm just like, so when it's dark outside, when you look up at the sky, what color is the sky? It's black. So dark has always been associated with black, with dark. Or dark has always been associated with black. These are not arguments that I'm trying to make. I'm just saying that what the facts are. There's no specific text that says Joan of Arc was white. There's none at all. I know people say, well, she worked in the field and that's why she was dark. You can say that all you want, but in the real world, dark means black. And I know a lot of people will say, well, there's, when you go to Asia and they have dark people, guess what? They have brown skin. I've seen brown skinned Koreans, literally. Brown skinned Koreans, full-blooded over there, okay? Like straight up. Not brown like mine, but they had a little tint of brown to them. And that's because I traveled the world. I've been around the world. So when people talk about the word black, it strikes a chord with them. They get all upset. They don't like it. They think that history is being rewritten and all this other stuff. No, history is not being rewritten. You just don't know your own history. You watch too much television. You ask too many Grok questions and ChatGPT questions that you have no idea what you're talking about. First, define what is black. Because black doesn't mean they're sub-Saharan. I have so many people saying, stop saying the sub-Saharan. I'm like, come on, man. I've never said that it was sub-Saharan. So it's just crazy how people go about their things. And this book actually explains it too in very, very good details. In this book, he even says that we don't know for sure where the Olmec people came from. But what we do know is that when you look at the depictions, wide nose and so on, thick lips and so on and so forth, they'll say, well, that's not African because they have, Mesoamericans with the same features. Well, guess what? Now you got to get those people's DNA, and you can't get that, right? Unless you ask that person. So the point is that you have to use all your sources to come up with the conclusion. A lot of people say, well, Africans didn't travel, across the seas and this, that, and the third. And I'm just like, come on, man. All you gotta do is look at the haplogroups, and then you gotta look up the haplogroup before the haplogroup and before the haplogroup, because it just didn't come outside of the air, right? So it had to come some way. So just to make it simple for everybody, Black is light brown to dark brown. Okay, that doesn't mean they came from Africa. Okay, you got people. Maybe, for instance, let me just say this: they say that all people originate from Africa some way, right? So we can just knock that out the motion right there until somebody proves otherwise. I know a lot of people will say, well, they had people come into Africa, which I'm never going to deny that. Godfrey Higgins talks about that. He said people left Africa, and some people generations and thousands of years later, they came back into Africa. I'm not going to deny that. That's a scientific fact. But when you go off the haplogroups, the DNA, you do that and you look at, I guarantee you, anybody that looked at their DNA, you look at their haplogroups, it's going to tell you what your haplogroup number is. And it's going to tell you where you came from. Now, if your haplogroup doesn't start in Africa and it starts somewhere else, it's usually a much later time frame, right? So it's just so many people get so mad about it. They think that history is being rewritten. No, history was messed up from the get-go, okay? Because people had this agenda. And I'm telling you, from what I've learned, Black people have African Americans at that time, Africans at that time, did not have the ability to read at that time. They literally got in trouble for reading and lynching and killed for this stuff. Okay. Then they started learning from these Europeans, and then they started teaching other Black people, and they started getting educated, and they started spreading the message and so on and so forth. And now some of the people who are technically racist, they'll say, oh, you're Afrocentric. That I'm honestly going to say this. I think anybody that uses that word, I believe they're a racist. And the only reason why I say that is because they're saying that for one reason and one reason only. They think that everything is that Black people are saying everything and is comes from Africa. I don't believe that. I just follow what the science is. Matter of fact, Bruce Fenton had wrote a book that I've read. This dude said 195,000 years ago. This is when nobody came before that. And I'm just like, bro, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. So it's people like him that spread misinformation, because when you give them information, which I did, I gave him information. He blocked me. He straight up blocked me. But his book ain't selling nothing. You know what I'm saying? His book ain't going nowhere, right? Because his information is flawed, it's incorrect, and he has an agenda, he has a narrative that he wants to share, just like a lot of people do. That's why me personally, I read and share exactly what I've learned, where I got it from, and how I'm going to present it is the best way that I present it is what I do now. So it's very interesting. So one of the first times I ever heard about the Olmec heads and actually became interested in it was my favorite show is The Simpsons. A lot of you already know that. Favorite all-time show. I believe it was season 2, episode 22. It was called Blood Feud, right? Like, it's basically where they was trying to save Mr. Burns, and Bart had the blood type for it. And it originally aired in July 11th, 1991. Now I got that off the websites and stuff like that. So that's what I went off of. I can say for myself, this struck interest in me because The Simpsons has always been about sharing some type of little bit of knowledge. And I looked into it and I was like, oh, okay. And then the book 1976, this book came out, came out way before this. So most people already knew about it. So it's not me saying that this is the facts. I'm just sharing. I'm just going to share what I've read in this book and leave it at that. You come up to your own conclusions and ideas. Yes, some of the information is incorrect. This book was written in 1976 and we have updated information. Nothing in the book lasts forever as accuracy unless we can get a pinpoint, definite answer. Point example, people still fight about gravity till this day. I don't have to argue about gravity. I don't care how gravity even started. I don't have to be like Sir Isaac Newton or any of these other people. All I know is if I pick this up and I let go of it, it's going to fall. That's gravity. I don't have to do anything else about that. I don't have to come up with no mathematical equations, no scenarios, no theories, no none of that. I picked this up, this coaster up right here, Wounded Warrior Project. I picked this up, I let it go, and it falls. That's gravity. I don't have to argue that. So a lot of people like to argue about things that's not needed to be argued about. And it's sad because people get to the point where they feel like they think that, you know, our history, like I said, is being rewritten. And it's not being rewritten. What's happening is people are starting to read and they're like, hey, what about this? And then they go find sources. And I'm telling you, he got all his information from white European guys. Okay, so if you're going to be mad at somebody, don't be mad at him. Attack the people that he learned it from. Because if I learned something from somebody else, why are you going to be mad at me? Why not be at the person mad at the person that taught me or gave me the information? And that's what's wrong with this world, is that a lot of people like to attack the messenger. Why are you attacking the messenger? Attack the person that presented the information in the first place. The messenger is just sharing it. And if that messenger is wrong, educate that person. But educates that person without belittling them, calling them names and this, that, and that. I have had that happen to me so many times. It's crazy. And I'm telling you, and I'm like, yo, have you read this book? That's the first thing that I'll ask anybody that argues with me. Have you read this book? No? So you don't know what you're talking about. You're picking and choosing what other people said without doing your due diligence and reading it yourself. And that's why you're saying the stupid stuff that you're saying and you don't understand. And that's when the argument starts going left and right and all this other stuff, because everybody wants to sit up here and think they're smarter than each other. And all I do is I just say, man, I read the book. I know what it says. And I can argue my point both ways. I don't think that people came, all people came from Africa in a sense, right? And I'll explain that when I get into this, and I'll show you why. But I'm gonna go ahead and, you know, pull this book up, the first tab. And I believe it's the author's name note that I'm going to read first, because this is very important. A lot of people don't know this. And this is what I was talking about, you know, black and all this other stuff. So the word Negro has become a very sensitive term, loaded with negative connotations, whatever its original meaning, a specific race of Africans or just black-skinned people of general African descent. That meaning has deteriorated in the popular imagination. It is not surprising that many blacks, particularly in North America, now react to the word with varying degrees of pain and disgust. Okay. Remember, this is in the 1970s. I therefore consider it necessary to explain my particular understanding of the word and my use of it in this book. Now, this is important. This is literally his author's note before he starts it. He says, hey, I am about to share with you what is my understanding. If you have a different understanding, present it to me or present it to him that he's saying, and he'll go from there and he can make an argument from there. But a lot of people don't want to present their argument. They want to argue with you about how you're ignorant, how you're stupid, and all these other kinds of names, and throw out this stuff to belittle you. But he's explaining his idea from a black man's perspective, not from any other perspective, not from a white European perspective, not from a Mexican's perspective, not from a European, a Chinese or Japanese person. None. He's explaining it from his perspective as a, here, let me do something real quick. From his perspective, from a black man's perspective. So that's to me, that's important, right? And it should be important, right? Because how are you going to tell how another man sees something when they're in that skin, right? It's just crazy. So when people start talking, they don't want to listen. They just want to talk, and throw out some stuff and then get mad about it. So we're going to continue. I have searched for alternatives. That's what he says. He has searched for alternatives, and I have used several in different parts of the text. For example, I have often used the term Negroid, since the adjective, strangely enough, seems to diffuse some of the negative connotations of the noun. Now listen, some. And then I have tried to confine the use of the term Negro to quotations and direct reference to quotations. The word, let's see where it says, the word cannot be deleted. However, whatever the sensitivity of certain readers from early and present anthropological and archaeological texts. Now, that's important. Sensitive, and then sensitivity of readers. Now, this is what I always say. I say, if you can separate your emotions from what you've learned, you're going to get educated. You're going to gain knowledge. If you can't, you're just going to revert back to what you believe in your narrative, and you're going to be upset and whatnot. And it's okay. It's okay, but just admit it. Especially if you're a man and you're a grown man, just admit that your pride is in your way. Because most of the people that get mad about this stuff are men. I don't usually see too many women getting upset about this stuff. The term black, although it is the fashionable and more acceptable term, presents problems in several contexts. Now, this is what he's saying. He's saying that it causes issues. Okay. And the reason why he's going to explain it. It says to speak of a black skeleton would be ridiculous. Skin coloration, as such, means nothing in the study of bones and other ancient physiological remains. The classical distinctions between the three main racial categories are Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucoid have to be determined by reference to certain structural features, measurements, and relationships that are not derived from superficialities of color. It is unfortunate that the early misuse of skeletal evidence to prove evolutionary differences between races, a blatant fiction, because I'm going to the next page, so it cut off right there. Blatant fiction has placed the fairly precise science of craniology in popular disrepute. Black also means nothing when we are talking about gods among the Native Americans. Tezcatlipoca is a black god because black is his symbolic and ceremonial color. See, he's explaining what he means by this word black. He's giving people his idea, and he's giving you the mythology and the symbology of it. He is not African. That's what he says, because there are a lot of people says, oh, you're Afrocentric. You want everything to be black. You want everything to be African. He literally just says right here, he is not African as Nalapili, the Mexican god of jewelers, whose indisputably Negroid features were sculpted in green stone by the Mexicans, while his hair was kinky, was cast in pure gold. He also says, this is where it's really interesting, because the whole Joan of Arc thing came into it for a reason. I have sometimes found hyphenated terms similar to those used by certain French Africans, writers, terms like Negro African, useful. I have also used hyphenated terms like Negro Nubian and Negro Egyptian, okay? Because we know that Egyptians are a mixture of people. They're not just, African. Some of them are actually Mesopotamian. Some of them are European, because we got to think about the Greeks and stuff, right? And we know that they actually lived in Egypt. And they also mixed with the people that was there. Some may object to this. Why should one append Negro to Nubian? Either the Nubians are Negroid or they are not. This is a simplification of the complexity that one faces as an anthropologist and historian. The terms which are used in this book to highlight the racial identity of Nubians in the 25th dynasty stand in contradiction to attempts by several anthro-historians, particularly the British scholars Arkell and Shiney, to deny the Negro ancestry of the Nubian pharaohs. Okay. So he's telling you that they're not all African, and he says you got to separate people. It's so funny because, like I said, when people think of black, in here in America at least, and this is crazy, they think it's all sub-Saharan, and they forget all. Matter of fact, this is not even the true size of Africa. Okay, Africa is way bigger than this, right? Way bigger than Greenland. But how is Greenland almost half the size of Africa? So people are not as educated as they think they are. They just feel like they want to possess that they think. They don't read. They go to Grok. See, Grok, ChatGPT, and Grok, and all this AI is making people lazy, because people have wrote about this stuff. And ChatGPT and Grok can't teach you an entire book in a matter of 2 minutes. Okay, it just gives you the snippet of what they do, and it picks and chooses. That's why you have to ask it certain questions. You have to ask it certain types of theories and scenarios and so on and so forth. If you're not asking it questions and challenging it, then you're just trying to go with a narrative, right? So that's what most people do. So let's go to the next tab. The building of the new city Isabella, the struggle to subdue and convert the natives of the Caribbean who had massacred the first settlement of Spaniards and demolished their fort, occupied most of Columbus' time until his return from his second voyage in 1496. While in Hispaniola, However, something happened that confirmed and complemented what Don Juan had said. The Indians gave proof that they were trading with black people. Now, this is interesting because the word Indians is very interesting to me, because the reason why they're called Indians on our side of the world in the Americas is because when people were traveling and leaving, Spain and all this other stuff, and they finally made it to what they considered a new world, they seen people with dark skin. And these same individuals, like the Dravidians and the Ethiopians, they have some very similar aspects, right? And matter of fact, Ethiopians, if you look at the Greeks, Ethiopia was also, according to them, was also in India. So they considered them Indians because that's what they called them on that side of the world. So when they got to this side of the world, they seen them with their different type of hair texture and stuff like that. It was like, oh, Indians, which is, not the correct word, but that's what happened. Okay, so we have to understand how these names and words and titles and all this stuff, other stuff came to be, and how it progressed and stayed, and even into 2026, right? Even in 2026, right? A lot of people still say Indians when they know they're called either Native American or indigenous people, right? And we can't even really call them Native Americans. I don't like to call them Native Americans. I like to call them, the indigenous people here, right? And whatever tribe they came from here, because Native Americans are saying, well, they're native. I'll explain that in a minute because I don't want to get into too much into that, because the terms just it throws a lot of people off, right? Because Native Americans never called themselves that. It was outsiders who called them that. So I'm just going to keep that simple and stupid. It wasn't them. They never went around and say, yeah, we're Native Americans. No, that was a word that they adopted during out their journeys through their history, but they called each other by their tribes. The same thing in Africa. Black people Africans didn't call each other black people in Africa. They called them according to their tribe and their groups of people that they were with, like Hutus and Tutus and stuff like that, right? So for me, like I said, it's just very important to understand what is actually written down and stop taking things so emotional, right? The next tab, it says, it is in contradiction to the most elementary logic and all too artistic experience that an Indian could depict in a masterly way the head of a Negro without missing a single racial characteristic unless he had actually such seen one, right? The types of people depicted must have lived in America. The Negro element is well proven by the large Olmec stone monuments as well as the terracotta items, and therefore cannot be excluded from the pre-Columbian history of the Americas. Now, this is interesting to me because a lot of people would talk about, the wide nose and lips. Well, that's something that people who at that time were trying to do, talk down on other people. Oh, they got a wide nose, right? Or they got fat lips, right? And blah, blah, blah. And the talk, that's why they chopped the nose off and all that other stuff. Look, first of all, I'm mixed with Turkish. My mom is Turkish, like I said. I've had Turkish people when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan say, I can tell you're Turkish because of your nose, right? And they look just like me, like skin color and everything. So, like I said, it goes back to the skin being black is light brown to dark brown, okay? Now, I'm not saying that all the Olmecs were like this, right? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that according to the text and what we've learned so far, even in DNA, you can look at some of the oldest haplogroups are in Mesoamerica came from Africa. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's because of modern day migration and so on and so forth. But how do you really figure that out, right? When you look at somebody's DNA, if you ever did a DNA test, it will tell you the generations of the DNA. It'll tell you like 1 to 3, 6 to 9, so on and so forth, right? I actually done mine, so I actually know what it looks like. And it's just very interesting. So, it's not a matter of me trying to tell anybody that, I think this is the fact. So let's go to the next tab. Abu Bakari listened to all this, but took no chances. So there would be no single desire, no one kind of boat. He would give us blessings to all the seen practical. He was not going to gamble on one man's theory and ignore the rest. He saw the configuration of his fleet like the political configuration of Mali. At the helm stood he, the central and unifying authority under him, the most diverse and incongruous crew of elements on the Sudanic deck of the world, his fleet will be a mirror of his ship of state. Okay, so basically, this is actually just talking about the boat. So the king specified that each boat built for the ocean voyages should be accompanied by or attached to a supply boat, which stored gold and other items of trade, along with dried meat and grain and preserved fruit in huge ceramic jars to last its company in the master boat for at least 2 years, 4 times as long as the stocks of the trans-Saharan caravans from Cairo to Sanaa. 200 master boats were built and 200 supply boats as the task neared completion. Abu Bakari left his palace at Niani and encamped on the seacoast to watch the final stages of the operation. It was the scene an Egyptian pharaoh must have witnessed during the erection of a pyramid. He felt pride at the thought that he was probably the only king in the world at that time who was wealthy enough and enough at peace within his borders to divert such a vast labor force from its military and agrarian duties to gratify his royal whim. So basically, it's just talking about this. This chapter is actually where it's talking about the boats and how these people built these boats and how they traveled and stuff like that. So I can't read the whole thing because it's definitely on there, but he definitely has, and this was what's interesting. He puts notes right here, as you can see. Oh, let me see. Yeah, he puts notes on there, right? And he shares where he gets this information from, right? So he's telling you where he got this information from, so everybody can go do their own due diligence. And he also has an index in the back. So he's telling people, look, if you don't agree with me, that's fine, but at least go look at the source and see where I got the information from. And if you don't agree with me, obviously you don't agree with that person, so don't attack him as the messenger, attack the person that shared the information. And like I said, this was in 1976, so you have to go and consider that also. It is generally admitted that the first people to inhabit America were Mongols from Asia who came to this continent via the Bering Straits some 40,000 years ago, the earliest date suggested by the most recent research. So he's literally telling people like, yo, I know where people came from. I know the theories, I know the ideas, and so on and so forth. So he's not arguing with anybody. He literally puts this in his book. He literally says it is generally admitted that the first people to inhabit America were Mongols. He's saying that. So he's not sitting here denying any information, okay? He's not. His questions arise when he looks at the back of the Olmecs and he sees the braids in the back, or he sees the noses, the lips, the helmet. I've read that the helmets that they had over the Olmec helmets that they had were very similar and very close to the ones that they found in Mali and Africa. So, and a lot of people say, well, that's a coincidence. Yeah, there could be a coincidence, but what if it's not? Why are you picking a coincidence versus it might not be a coincidence? Well, because you have a narrative that you want to share, or that person has a narrative they want to share, right? They don't want people to say it's coming from Africa, but the question arises, well, if somebody comes up to me and says, I can tell you're African because your nose and your lips, and you go look at a sculpture or an artifact or a depiction or something, you're like, well, dang, that sculpture, depiction, and artifact has the same type of features that I have, and I come from Africa, so where would they come from, right? And I'll get into that in a second when I get more into it, because I'm going to use my map behind me. He says, we have pointed to the Egyptian influence on the shipping of the Far East. Egyptian ships also visited the Somali coast of Africa. In East Africa, however, shipping, though of great antiquity, owes less to early Egyptian than to a much later Arab influence in the Indian Ocean. It would be of interest to look at the ships of these maritime African peasants, the Swahili, for it appears that some of them, while trading on the Indian Ocean through storms in their monsoon season, drifted or were blown into the Korosiwo, a current known as the Black Stream. That is a Pacific current at the terminal point of which on the Pacific coast of North America, a tiny isolated African community, the Black Californians. Okay, that's the source. All you got to do is look that up and research that, right? The next tab, a lot more is known today about these currents from Africa to America than was known as Humboldt's time. Two main currents, the Guiana current and the Canaries current, are relevant to our study. Okay, the following information is so vital to an understanding of how the ocean provides its own pilots and propellers. It's illustrated in plate 10. So of course he has a book and you got to look at plate 10. So what he's basically saying is that these people right here in Africa, the current could take them to the Americas on these coasts without even having to do any extreme things, especially when you're caught in a storm. I mean, have you ever been out on a boat on in the ocean or in the river and seen a storm just come in and swoop people in? I've been fishing plenty of times on my boat, and I can tell you storms come in quick, and you're always like, oh, it's not going to do nothing. Oh, it's not going to do nothing. And I'm sitting here fighting, trying to get back to the bank, even though I got a big old motor on the back because the waves are pushing and everything. So if that can happen in today's term with me having the technology that I have and the big boat that I have with the motor and all this other stuff, imagine the people that's out there just using, a paddle, how they get sucked. And yes, some people will say, well, how did people continue to migrate there? Well, maybe they jumped back in the boat and made it and replayed the scenario and they got back. It's so many different theories. And instead of coming up with an argument of saying that it's not possible, what arguments can you prove that say that it is possible? Because you already said it can't. So when you make an argument, you should be able to make a 2-point argument. One that says something didn't happen and something that did happen because you want to be able to use sources from both sides. You should be, if you're knowledgeable on a subject, your questions should always continue to grow. Why? Because we don't have the ability to go back in the past, and we don't have the ability to go look at this stuff and see it for ourselves. So let me get to the next tab. All right, let's see. Next tab. Oh, nope. There we go. The main source of confusion over his appearance has been the use of this word white. So let's see, what is he talking about? I think he's talking about, okay, yeah, the confusion between the native Mexican son of Mixcoatl and a line figure. Okay, so he's talking about, the Quetzalcoatl who came from outside and was reputed to have landed in America in a company of boats was a tall, bearded man. Okay. He was clad in long white garments, probably carried a royal mace or a ball of some kind in his hands, and wore a turban, canonically crowned, or a similar headdress. So this is where actually people say that Quetzalcoatl was a white individual. I've heard that so many times. Quetzalcoatl was a white individual. He came from possibly Egypt because he's also known as Thoth, or he's also known as Hermes. He's also known as Ningajita. They're saying that he was a white individual. That's what they're saying, right? But what I've learned through my research is that when somebody wore white, it meant they were pure. For whatever reason that people pick white as pure, that's the reason why, right? So he says right here, the main source of confusion over his appearance has been the use of the word white. In some oral traditions, this word has been completely misinterpreted by many scholars and had led to the most fanciful notions that it was a European who innovated civilization and religious reform in America. The myth and ritual, the pattern of religious expression in America differ sharply from those of Europe. The Catholic friars finding the cross in America, the cross is also found in pre-Christian Africa, had nothing to do with Christ, okay? Pounced on the phrase white bearded figure and claimed that Quetzalcoatl was St. Thomas or St. Bernardine. Now, this is what people are saying. In 1949, P.M. Hansen even made claims for Quetzalcoatl as a reincarnated Jesus Christ. This is why you'll read from people like Billy Carson, who would say that he believes, and he wrote in his book that his first theory was that Thoth and Jesus Christ were one and the same. Well, if he read this book first, that has always been a known thing, right? This is not something that he came up when he wrote the book, The Emerald Tablets. This has always been a thing. Like I said, this is 1976 of this information. So this is where you get the Jesus Christ and Quetzalcoatl / Thoth idea, because a lot of people say Quetzalcoatl and Thoth are one and the same. So the actual person that actually came up with this idea was in 1949, P.M. Hansen, and you won't read that in Billy Carson's book. So, and the reason why I bring him up is because he says the same thing, that, Jesus Christ and Thoth were one and the same, and possibly Quetzalcoatl. And that's why a lot of people who follow these ancient alien theories, because they believe that, for some odd reason, these individuals came from the sky. I'm telling you, I've already went on this, so I don't have to beat a dead horse. But this is where you get the information from, right? It says Quetzalcoatl did not have Northern European features. Native Americans spoke of him at times as being white in a symbolic sense, in the way Muslims may speak of Muhammad as a handful of white light in Allah's palm. Okay, a black or brown Negroid man, as Abu Bakari was, appearing out of the east in long flowing white Muslim robes, would be called whites. Now, if anybody that's been to Iraq and Afghanistan, they know that higher up individuals in the hierarchy wore white robes. It was to show purity, it showed God, it shows that it was just basically pure, basically. And I just want to keep that as simple as, and that's why people will say, that they were gods, because they seen that. It says white may be also used as a referent to skin for pale Asiatics like the Japanese. He says Moncocked Ape relates in a narrative published in 1725 that when a hand of white bearded figures hunting the Pacific coast in a post-Columbian period were hunted down, they were found to be Japanese. Even in the instance, the term white used as literal referent for the skin of the Japanese was a post-Columbian linguistic influence. So if you want to just, anybody that wants to argue his point, you have to read his book and see what he's actually talking about. And it goes on and on for this information. Of course, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that's just like a little snippet of why he said what he said. And he's also telling you, look, because when we get to the next half, he says, there is a disturbing and persistent attempt, and it may be quite unconscious, so involuntary has become the racial reflex to create a white Superman to account for all civilization and major achievements of non-Caucasoid peoples. In this connection, I would like to take the issue with Eric von Däniken, who, and rest in peace, like I said, I already did his book too. He takes issue with Eric von Däniken, who in his Chariot of the Gods invents a divine species from outer space to account for the building of both the Egyptian pyramids and the gigantic stone figures of Easter Island. Quetzalcoatl, in some of his representations, does wear solar air disc, but this is because of his association with the sun god. Let's see. Let me make sure of something. The first birdmen appear in the rock art of Africans in the Tassili Mountains of the Sahara, centuries before they appear in the tomb of dynastic Egypt and in the art of ancient America. And it says, see chapter 6. It is true, of course, that the huge figures of Easter Island represent no known human race, but are a race of legendary giants. The prototype of the Superman giant, however, may be found on this earth and within the same sun god complex. The Egyptian god Horus attained, according to J.H. Breasted, a statue of 8 cubits, nearly 40 feet. Camels have been found etched on the rocks of the desert plateau of Marcasi in South America. Because there were no camels in South America, von Däniken assumes spacemen etched them there. Now that's true, because Eric von Däniken, this is just one thing that I did not understand about Eric von Däniken, is that he doesn't really look at the sources as far as how was it symbolically, right? And rest in peace, he had started this whole ancient alien things, and that's why a lot of people believe that aliens came from outer space because of him, because he had asked questions. But then he wrote another book later on that said that it definitely came from there, right? So, and now we're in 2026, and we believe that aliens actually came here and built stuff using, the stuff that they used. It's just crazy. But the fact is that if you're going to say something, you have a responsibility to continue to update your information. If I had questions in my book, which I still do, that's why I do what I do. I go and read everything that I can. If all you read are books about aliens, then that's all you're going to go off of. Matter of fact, Zecharia Sitchin in his books, and I've already went over all his books, he really, in so many ways, if you take out all the ancient alien stuff that Zecharia Sitchin says in his books, all you are left with are African people doing everything. Literally, I'm not even kidding, not even joking. And I'm telling you because he quotes this book. He literally, Zecharia Sitchin quotes this book. Okay, so, and I get the sense when I read his books that Black people, African people were the chosen people. If we're going to go with the alien theories, that they were the chosen people by the aliens to progress with with the Americas. Let me take this Bluetooth off on my phone because I'm getting messages on here on my phone. So let me turn this Bluetooth off real quick because it keeps popping up. But it's just amazing to me that people don't understand this. So when people talk about ancient aliens and people talk about extraterrestrials and all this other stuff, it makes me think, what are you reading? Are you countering this any other way? Are you using scientific data to counter this? Are you looking at what people said about the Africans and so on and so forth? If not, then, what narrative are you trying to create? And it's just like, whoa, yo, it's hard to find that, right? So for me, let me bring this book back up. Let me bring this back up. Slideshow from the beginning. Yeah. This book right here is not a book to sit up here and make somebody feel bad. It's not a book to sit up here and say, hey, everything came from Africa. What he's saying is that, and this is what I get from him so far, is that he was looking at the features, how they carved them, how they looked at them, symbols and symbology and stuff like that. It's crazy what you can find if you just pay attention. It should be mentioned in this connection that serological surveys of the Lacondian Indians, the most secluded of Maya tribes, conducted in the 1960s by Dr. Alfonso de Garay, director of the genetic program of the National Commission for Nuclear Energy in Mexico, indicated early and extensive contact between the Lacondians and Africans. So he's using sources that other people are saying, hey, look, these people had some type of relationship with the Africans. Okay. So he's using his sources the best way he can. He says Negroid characteristics have been found in their blood. Although they have not been known to mix with outsiders in post-Columbian times, Dr. D. Garay's report includes, among other things, a reference to the sickle cell, a malaria-resistant mutant gene usually found only in the blood of Black people. So when people say, oh, haplogroups and DNA and this and that, then you got to start looking at the diseases. What type of diseases affect the most people? What kind of diseases were the people affected by first? So you have to use all your sources, and people use a source that makes them feel good that can be contradicted in so many ways. Can you contradict this? Can you? I'm not a doctor, so I can't, you know what I'm saying? But if you are a doctor, counter and pass that information also, people can be knowledgeable on the subject. He says Britain, in his early study of Nagualism, has provided us with series of words in Maya and Maya dialects like the Quiche dialect of the Yucatan, the Zapotec language, and the Nahuatl language to show that some foreign group passing through these linguistically diverse but geographically close peoples introduced a series of words. Looking at the series, we see that Na, N-A, is at the root of words in these languages, meaning mystical knowledge, intelligence, prophecy, sorcery, and magic. One example from each language group should be enough to illustrate that point. Na'at, intelligence, and Maya. So he's breaking it down linguistically, and he's not doing it because he's not a linguistics, but guess where he gets the information from? People who are linguistics, these individuals who are, this is their profession. This is what they're saying. See, this is what people don't like. And this is what really irritates me and pisses me off. People don't like you using sources that they didn't know about, right? When you give somebody a source, they usually is like, they'll be mad and upset about it, and they'll argue about it. Um, I don't personally, like I said, I don't use a source and say this is 100% accurate. What I do is I listen to what was written and I try to counter it. So, like I said, not all this stuff is accurate, but if we're talking linguistics, I'm not sure about that. Here's another one. Pottery is now known to have been made by Black Africans as early as 7,000 BC. That's what he's saying. In fishing hunting community near Khartoum, the people of this community fired pottery and combed it with catfish spine to give it a basket effect. The oldest ivory figurines found in ancient Egypt were sculpted by the Badari, a Negro race of the Egyptians. Another form of art found among the Egyptians came from the Sudan and points to the domestication of cattle as early as 4,500 BC by Black Africans. Are the rock paintings of cattle with intricately twisted horns. Now, what strikes me interesting in this is he says Black Africans. So that means are there white Africans? I can tell you right now, if we're going to go off of what he said here in 1976 and 2026, Elon Musk is the richest African out there, right? So, because he was born in Africa, so he's the richest African. But is he, considered African in the sense of, ancient times or so on and so forth? People will argue and say no. But is he considered African as of today because he was born there? Yes. So why argue that, right? So technically, Elon Musk is the richest African. So the richest person in the world is African. And some people will say, well, he's white skinned, so is white people. Say what makes you feel good, but it doesn't defeat the fact that he's African, and it doesn't defeat the fact that the knowledge that came from Africa, right? And you just got to pay it. Like I said, you got to pay attention to the words in this. People will get emotional. I probably will catch some flack from some Black people and say Elon Musk is an African. Well, he was born in Africa, so he's African. Okay, so in my eyes, that's it. Say what you want to say, but he is the richest one. So we're going to keep it pushing. The only surviving species of this dog. So he's talking about a dog that was found in, let's go. He says, where is this? This is a paragraph before. Okay, the Egyptian dog-head god Anubis graces the Nubian funerary offering tables. These offering tables found in the graves with invocations to the gods written in the Nubian script show that goddess Nephthys and the dog-bearded god Anubis, both concerned with the cult of the dead, pouring libations in the very period the Olmecs began to sculpt little clay dogs attached to wheels or tiny chariots with wheels. A lot of people have already seen them. I've seen them. In the peculiar blend of the dog and chariot lies virtually their only one use of the wheel. The lack of the horse or other draught animals of comparable sizes precluded a more practical use. How they struck upon the ritual association dog-wheel chariot is an intriguing question. The full-blown Egyptian practice, however, of the mummifying dogs has been found in Peru. Okay. What is even more intriguing is that these dogs mummified in Peru do not all look like the typical American Spitz and Husky types. Some look uncannily like the Basenji, the species of Egyptian dog worshipped by the pharaohs. The only surviving species of this dog is found today in Africa, where it is used by the pygmies of the Ituri forest to track and chase game. So he's using the domestication of certain animals and how they're still represented in other parts of the world, and that it goes back a certain time frame. So he's saying that if they had this in Africa and they found it in the Americas somewhere, then obviously it had to come from Africa because it's older in Africa and still being used in there. And I'm sure it's still being used today because it's 2026 and all this trading and all this stuff happened, right? But that's another source that he's talking about. Another shared feature often noted in calling for serious examination is that of fitted megalithic masonry. The finest examples are found at Giza in Egypt, at Lexus in Morocco, where it diffused at Cusco in Peru across the Pacific from Peru and on Easter Island. The technique calls for considerable skill since the massive stone blocks fitted together are not of any regular shape or size, not cut in conventional squares, for example, but display the complex regularity of patterns or designs in the jigsaw puzzle. No cement is used in the building of these massive blocks, so wonderfully exact is the masonry work of which they are composed. The identical methods of quarrying in the New and Old Worlds, which Seton, and it says Seton, Seton, Lloyd's study has demonstrated may account for this extraordinary building technique. Both the ancient Egyptians and Americans quarried stone by driving wooden wedges into natural faults in the stone, which cracked when the wedges filled with water. So he's telling you how they built and how they shaped some of these pyramids. So when people say, like Jimmy Corsetti says, we don't know how the pyramids were built, and we don't know how they did this and did that. Well, if you read, they give you ideas. Now you just have to prove them wrong, because can you put a piece of wood in there and crack it open? I've never tried it. So anybody that has 1.7 million followers like Jimmy Corsetti, he should be able to find somebody who can replicate that and show it in real time, right? It should be easy. Go to a stone quarry, grab a block, see where the natural fault is, grab a piece of wood and a mallet, and see if you can crack that thing open. And it has been proven. They have YouTube videos on this. They literally have YouTube videos on this. So we didn't need metal in a sense of iron and steel and all this other stuff to do what we did. All right, so it's just amazing that when you pick up books and you read, you can tell. But one thing I do want to point out is that he mentioned Egyptians in Peru. From my studies, and this is an argument that's still ongoing, and you're right, I do say I think the Olmecs rock also, and I'm going to be reading his book about the Kahari tribe in the next week's next week I'm going to start reading his book, so I'll have his book coming up. And hopefully I'll be doing a podcast discussion with Chris within the next, I'm going to say probably 3 weeks to talk about his book. But what I want to talk about is on Peru and the Egyptians is that what I've learned through my study is, even though he says that it could have came from Egyptians and how they built these pyramids, that's something that I can counter, because there is arguments that there are older pyramids in Peru as of right now. Now, I also know about the pyramids in China. I know about the pyramids in Bosnia, and people will say there's pyramids in Antarctica. But if the pyramids in Peru are older than the ones in Egypt, that holds up a whole nother type of argument. Now, this is where I want to come in and say this, because I only have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more tabs. So let's go to my map real quick. So a lot of people would say, let me stretch this out so I can get this better. So a lot of people would say that about right here is where humans started because of their haplogroups, right? And they say they started around here because of the simple fact that the DNA, the bones, and all this other stuff points to this area. Well, if you go right here, because this is supposed to be the equator right here, right? That's where they said that man started. You have the equator over here, right? Which goes into Peru and Ecuador. And then you have Malaysia you got near Papua in Australia. Okay, we don't know exactly where humans started. I know there's tridactyls on this side that a lot of people talk about. That is very interesting to me, because this is a whole different humanoid type of species. And then you have a certain group of individuals. Now, these individuals that's right here are not the same individuals up here and over here. Okay, what I mean by that is that the oldest Homo sapien bones that we have found here on planet Earth so far is in Morocco, Africa, up here, 300,000 years ago. This is the oldest Homo sapien bones found in Africa, 300,000 years ago. So my question is, why is this area still considered the birthplace of humans if the oldest Homo sapien bones, listen to me, oldest Homo sapien bones. So that means everybody that's a Homo sapien or a Homo sapien can trace that here in Morocco, Africa. Okay. So now my question is, how far is Morocco from Spain? Well, shit, you can look at Spain on a good day. You can see Africa and you can see Spain, depending on what side of the land you're on, right? And if you're fishing in between those, or if you're fishing in the Mediterranean, why in the hell would you not go and migrate to these places, right? Because it's easy, right? You can even do it right here. So my question is still to this day, even though he says that, or he doesn't say it, science says today that it still starts here because of the haplogroups. Well, the oldest bones found of Homo sapiens are right here. The oldest bones of Homo sapiens, from what I understand, is in Ethiopia. Okay, and that goes about 200,000 years ago. Bruce Fenton says no more than 195,000 years ago. Well, obviously, he never read the updated information that they did an updated peer-reviewed article on it, and they added 200 and I think like 30 to 50,000 years that it goes back here. So Bruce Fenton doesn't know what he's talking about, and he has a book that people will quote and says, "Well, people migrated to Africa." I won't deny that. People definitely migrated to Africa. I mean, you can look right here in South Africa, see that, right? So I'm not going to argue that. But my point is that he's saying that he's saying that humans didn't come from Africa, which all science from right now still says that. And it's just, but my question is that, and I still don't understand it, is, like I said, the oldest Homo sapien bones are right here. Not only that, if this area is considered the area and people were migrating all over, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, so on, as Cro-Magnon. Matter of fact, Cro-Magnon are considered, the new term for that word is early Europeans, types of people, right? Early Europeans is like E something, I can't remember, but it's like early Europeans. Why would they call them early Europeans? And this is interesting to me because most people, when they consider people white, they think Europeans being white, but the first individual into Europe was somebody from Africa. Okay, now I've done a podcast discussion with, I did an actual podcast discussion with this individual named Dr. Keith Chang. Okay, he is a geneticist. Him and his team found what is called SLC24A5, which is actually what he considers the white gene. Okay, the gene that went from dark skin, light brown, to what we have as considered white skin. Now, this is not me saying it. This is him. Okay, you can look him up, Dr. Keith Chang, SLC24A5, and you can do your research and all this other stuff. And it goes back, I've read it goes back anywhere from 6,000 to 20,000 years. I specifically asked him, and he explained it in so many ways how it came back, how you can find this information. And he uses the zebrafish as one of his talking points for this. So if you want to know about that, you can find that on my YouTube channel also. But it's not me saying, I just like to stick to sources that I can read and research. So when somebody tells me something, if you don't agree with me, all you have to do is say, hey, I don't agree with this because this person said that. And then I'm going to read that person's information. I'm going to see what they said and go off of that. The sugar loaves of South America are analogous to the pyramids of Egypt. I did not know that. I really appreciate that. That's actually interesting. And so much of the history we're taught in public school is either a lie or half truth. It's why I have embraced cultural diffusionist theories of human migration. Like I said, I'm going to read his book, The Kalahari Tribe, and we'll get more into that. Hopefully, I actually skimmed through it. I went through it and I looked through the pages, and he definitely has a section about DNA. So that's very interesting to me. So, does it really hurt people's pride to know that everybody started from Africa? Does that really make people angry? Because we know for a fact that that there were people on this earth before what is considered these haplogroups. Now, the Australopithecus afarensis and Australopithecus ramidus, there are these how can I say, monkey ape group type of individuals who started walking by bipedalism. They practice bipedalism, and that's what some people consider the beginning of human life. I know a lot of people are mad at Darwin because they say Darwin says we come from apes. And I've read Darwin's books. And matter of fact, he revised his books a couple of times. So if you read one thing and you didn't agree with it, you have to read all his books to see what he said, because he definitely changed things up in later books. But he says that we as Homo sapiens and apes have a cousin of, or an individual. And a lot of people will say, well, if we came from gorillas and apes and all this other stuff, why are they still here? It's not that we came from them. He's just saying that there's a common ancestor between it. So however they want to find that is. There's been plenty of arguments on that. And I actually have a book that actually describes that, which I will go into the future about, go into about in the future. So just be looking out for that. The next tab is no African maize name, which is usually compound of the name for the local sorghum, and the name of the people from whom maize was obtained, connects the European unequivocally with the introduction of maize. Even the Mpongwe, whose word for maize is associated with the phrase meaning people of the sun, cannot be shown to have got maize from the Europeans, as Professor Poteris has claimed. So he's saying a professor named Poteris, I'm going to spell this name out. It is Porteres. The phrase people of the sun is widespread in Africa and pre-European. It was used to refer to the Egyptian pharaohs who were light-skinned. So when a lot of people hear the word light-skinned, they think that it's white. Man, this whole Joan of Arc thing got people in a frenzy right now because they said that she was light-skinned or sunburned. Why? There are light-skinned black people, and black people can get sunburned. So when people say she was light-skinned or sunburned, and it's because she was working in the fields, black people get sunburns too. So that's not a good, accurate argument. And then they'll show that depiction, but that same depiction would depict her in women attire with a sword, rather than what we know her as, according to historical documents, that she wore men's attire. That's how she were able to kind of fool some people, right? The next tab, I only got 4 more left. Oh no, I got 4 more left. Here we go. These are actually, this is actually where we get into the sources of where he says Cyrus Gordon, Before Columbus, New York Crown Publishers, 1971, page 71, 72, and 73. Gordon provides illustration reproductions of the Piri-Reis map, showing the correct longitudinal relationship between the Atlantic coast of South America and the Old World. So what I learned about the Piri-Reis map is that it was a map that was combined of other maps. So they took all the maps that they had and they made this map. And they also, there's people that don't actually believe that it was real or accurate or real or some sort, but that's on other people to argue. Cartographers projected the Piri-Reis map onto a grid. It then appeared virtually identical with the United States Air Force map of the world on an equidistant projection based on Cairo. And then it says, see comparative maps in Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. And he's telling you, go read Chariots of the Gods. What he's telling you is, he's quoting you. He's saying, look, read this book, read Chariots of the Gods, do your comparative study discussion, do your comparative studies. I wonder sometimes if, and I won't ever get the answer, and maybe he talked about it, I don't know. But did he quote from this book a lot? I'm not sure. So we have to go with what we know. In the last 2 tabs, this is the last 2 tabs. Nicholas Leon, an eminent Mexican authority, reports on the oral traditions of the Native Americans. According to some of whom the oldest inhabitants of Mexico were Negroes. Okay, Negroes, Africans, Black, people. Well, those words will strike a chord, and if you are Mexican, they don't want to hear the word Negro, right? But you have to look at what the word Negro actually means, right? The existence of Negroes and giants, he continues, is commonly believed by nearly all the races of our soil, and in their various languages, they had words to designate them. Several archaeological objects found in various localities demonstrate their existence, the most notable of which is the colossal granite head of Huapan, Veracruz, and an axe of the same located near the city to Teotihuacan abound little beads, little heads of the Ethiopian type and paintings of Negroes. Okay. The reference to giants is interesting since many continental Africans are much taller than the Native Americans, which is true. Vespucci mentions a strange race of tall men sighted on a Caribbean island now known as Caracoa. Hopefully I said that right. And his distinction biographer, Frederick Hall, believes that these men were blacks. In a letter to me, Fall wrote, Vespucci is accredited as the first explorer to reach Caracas, Island of Giants, and did so in the 1500s. His letter from Seville describes the giants, even the women, as a head and half and foot and a half. Any of the Spaniards with him, Spaniards to his day in Spain, saw many Moors, and Indians were of a different color also. And so Negro giants were described only by height and not by color. Americo does give the color of the Indians of Trinidad in the same letter. His letter written 5 or 6 months after his landing on Curacao was to his patron in Florence, and he could easily have failed to put in details we wish he had given. So just to keep it serious and just keep it honest, if you want to discredit somebody, at least read their material first before you discredit them. Don't just say because you're going off of emotions or what other people said. A lot of people want to, there's a lot of content creators out there. I know plenty of them, and they're doing it for business and they're doing it for money. They're going to go where the money leads. They're going to lead to the money, and they're going to go to the people who are going to fund them. Okay. Nobody wants to hear, and I'm not going to say nobody. People who are ignorant don't want to hear something opposite of what they believe. That's why it's hard to tell people who are Christian certain things about the Christianity religion. Same thing with Muslims and Islam, Catholicism, and all these other mythologies around here. So when you go against the grain, basically, they get mad. Me personally, all I want to do is share to people. Look, I highly recommend anybody to read this book, take this book, and say, this was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. These are just a few tabs of what I have. Right? I didn't mark everything in here, and the reason why is because not everything in here I needed to mark because I've already talked about it, and there are other books that I have from him that I've read before this book that reiterate some of the stuff in here and kind of contradicts what he says because the information got updated, and sometimes the information here was updated. All I'm wanting to tell people is that, look, the Olmec heads to him represents Africans. Okay. DNA can be tested of the indigenous people of the Mesoamericas, and they will see that some of that DNA, I'm not saying all, the words that I'm using is some, can be found related to Africa, but a lot of people would say that that's because of modern migration. Well, how do you pinpoint that, right? If that DNA goes back 6,000 years, 6 generations, or a couple of centuries, or a couple of days, right? How do you distinguish that? And it's all about a narrative. Nothing in this book, I feel like, is a deal breaker for either side. My question, he says in his book, we don't know where, these people came from. He just goes off of what he sees in the depictions. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, you can do what you want to do. But the information that he presented in his book came from white Europeans. He's just the messenger sharing what they shared. So you have to take that and say, okay, look, well, maybe honestly, this could be hit or miss. And it's up to you. A lot of people work off emotions. I don't work off of emotions. I work off just reading what I've read. I haven't even begun to tell you my theory. Like I said, how is it that the oldest bones are found in Morocco, Africa, that are Homo sapiens, but they say they came from Central Africa? That to me doesn't make any sense. If the oldest Homo sapien bones come from Morocco, Africa, then I'm going to say that's where humanity possibly started at. And that's very close to Spain, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to look to see how, if I could determine how wide that is. So you can literally go on Google Maps, draw your little scale, and see how far that is. Anybody could have canoed easily to Spain and all these other places, right? And a lot of people don't want to know that they don't care to know that they have African in them, and they're very prideful on Europeans. But this I'm just going to end it right here. Look, think about it. If the first people into Europe were Africans, and you're not more Neanderthal than you are African, then hey, what it is what it is. Don't be mad. It's not. I don't even know why it hurts people, right? I mean, that's the saddest part, is that people will say that the most disrespectful, derogatory things out there because they don't believe that we came out of Africa. And that's sad to me. And they'll make up numbers like Bruce Fitton will when he wrote in his book 195,000 years ago. And trust me, I'll be going over his book and breaking it down how ignorant he was. And I'm going to be using updated peer-reviewed 2026 information now. And I read his book in 2023, 2024. I actually wanted to do a podcast with him, but when I asked him a specific question, he actually got really irritated and mad, and then he blocked me. So these dudes, they block in their own knowledge because they don't care. And they always say, I've had people say because I'm too strong, or I attack them and this, that, and the third, but I'll see them doing the same exact thing to somebody else. They just don't like it when somebody does it to them and they can provide facts. Like I always say, knowledge is power. Get the book, read it. You can get it online for free PDF. If you really truly want to gain some knowledge, you'll pick up both arguments and you'll be able to counter it. Like I said, I don't understand how people came from Central Africa if the oldest Homo sapien bones came from Morocco, Africa, and then we go with Australopithecus and Afarensis, which goes back 3 to 6 million years ago, and they're considered the oldest humans on this planet, considered because of their bipedalism, and they came from Ethiopia. So how in the hell do we still get Central Africa? Until next time, like I always say, knowledge is power.
Got a little hype now, can I let it die down? I remember days in the trench. Time to go hard in, time to go all in, time to get my all to this shit. Panamera maxed out, first class flights out Atlantic to Pacific, yeah, it's lit.